Corey DeAngelis is joining us. Corey is a nationally known advocate to give parents the opportunity to have maximum amounts of tools in their toolbox to assist in their child's education. Am I putting that about right?
Absolutely. I fight to fund students, not systems.
There you go. Tell everybody about yourself. If they don't know you, they should be following you on all the social medias. You just spoke outside of the Tennessee State House to advance and to promote and to support the governor's legislation that would give parents more opportunity to choose where their kids go to school and the educational opportunities that their children have. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became the guy that you are, nationally known.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm Corey DeAngelis. I'm a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children. We fight to fund students, not systems. It's what most people would refer to as school choice, allowing the funding to follow the child to the education provider that works best for them. That could be the public school. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school, but for real this time, unlike with your doctor. But if not, you can take that funding to a private school, a charter school, or home-based education option. I really got into this as a researcher at the University of Arkansas, where I did my PhD in education policy. So you can call me a doctor, but I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I couldn't help you with the important stuff, but I can help you with math. You got the zingers, too.
You should have had a rim shot, but Bell left the room. So
my first study there actually looked at one of the longest standing modern voucher programs in the country in Milwaukee. They started this in 1990. I had student level data from the state evaluation of the program and followed those students until they were about 30 years of age, finding large reductions associated with school choice, reducing criminal activity later on in life. So I started to do a lot of academic research, looking at mostly non-test score outcomes, things like improving mental health, improving satisfaction for families, improving safety if you get a choice in your kid's education. And I also benefited from school choice myself. I went to government schools, all K through 12, so if I make any mistakes today, that's probably part of the reason. You can blame it on my fantastic government school education. But in high school, I went to something called a magnet school, which is a type of school choice, one of the more limited versions of school choice. It's still an institution run by the government, but they can have their admissions processes, they can have their standards, and I felt like that was a good opportunity for me. Other families should have educational opportunities too, and it shouldn't be limited to schools that are run by the government. You should be able to take your kids' education dollars to the provider that works best, whether it's
or limited
or
by your financial ability, which is what is so frustrating to me. Based on the pushback that you get all the time nationwide and the pushback that we're getting here in the state of Tennessee. So when I announced that I was having you on, I want to get this question out of the way because I promised that I would ask it. The pushback that you get on social media is incredible. And I told you right before we came on air is that I liked you before I knew you, because sometimes you like people based on the amount of enemies that they're collecting along their path of trying to get information out to the people.
Over the target.
Right. So all these liberals came out of the woodwork when Corey DeAngelis was coming on. Well, ask him about UNESCO. Ask him about UNESCO. Ask him about UNESCO. I'm asking you, I don't even know what it is. I'm asking you about UNESCO.
Yeah, someone found a profile of me on their website, the UNESCO, which I've never worked for them, never been paid by them. And even if I had shown up at one of their conferences or whatnot, I've never done any kind of association with them. If I was on the teachers union website, would you say, well, Corey's horrible because he debated a teachers union stooge at one of their conferences?
Right.
No, but look,
they want to claim that you somehow are associated with them. I
contacted them and had them remove me from their website. So this circulation is still going around of picture me on their website when I've never worked for them or taken any money from them. And even if I had, that's not an argument against school choice, but I haven't.
It's just an ad hominem.
And it's an ad hominem to try to silence people who support school choice, coming from the same people who already oppose school choice. So it is a classic ad hominem, and it comes from a lot of the crowd that tries to say that, this is an elaborate plot by the government to take over private schools too. Would you hear this from Gary Humble, who ran on school choice, for example? He runs Tennessee.
Yeah, he's attacking you from the right.
Yeah, well, I guess. Are you really on the right if you're going against the Republican Party platform? And his opponent, Jack Johnson's actually championing the issue, who beat him in the primary, and now Gary Humble, being a sore loser, is stomping his feet, throwing a temper tantrum, and now all of a sudden decides he's against school choice and coming up with this elaborate conspiracy about how this is a way for the Democrats to put CRT into the private schools. If that's true, if all the Democrats really had this elaborate plot to do so, why do they all vote against it, Matt?
Well,
why do your guests from last week, Heidi Campbell, who supports school choice for her own kids but fight against it for everybody else, why does she vote against it over and over again if this is actually a plot by the Democrats?
Well, I've learned when it comes to Gary Humble specifically. I've never met Gary. I've invited him repeatedly on the show. He refuses to come on. He told me in a telephone conversation that he would not come on with me. Okay, that's fine. But I've learned, and people like Gary, you cannot slay imaginary conspiracy theories if you do not first create imaginary conspiracy theories. For example, Governor Bill Lee and the rest of the Republicans in the state of Tennessee were going to use a special session to pass red flag laws, according to Gary Humble. Never brought them up, never came up, was never a reality. But now he takes credit for slaying that imaginary dragon that he himself created. Well, same thing with school choice.
And those fear-mongering about school choice, the burden of proof should be on them. We've had school choice in over 30 states now for over decades. And if we did find evidence of them controlling the private schools and injecting CRT into them, you'd think that evidence would have surfaced by now. The burden of proof should be on them. It doesn't exist. And in fact, the government can already regulate private and home education without school choice. They have. Historically, the authoritarians in Oregon outlawed private education in 1922. You had to send your kid to the government school. Was that because of school choice? No, it was because authoritarians wanted to control the minds of other people's children. Thankfully, in 1925, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, our Supreme Court famously ruled the child is not the mere creature of the state. Some people would be wise to remember those wise words, including Joe Biden, who thinks that kids belong to society.
So Humble, Gary and his ilk notwithstanding, there is, and I share the concern that some would use a state involvement in, more of a state involvement in the private sector or in homeschooling as a way to get the proverbial camel nose under the tent. How do you, as you've watched these things play out nationwide, how do you fight back against that? And how would you advise the people of the state of Tennessee to be wary of it? I think the concern is legit, but obviously you've done this nationwide.
Yeah, look, Randy Weingarten's made this argument, the same AFT president who was in Ukraine after the nation's report card scores came out, the president of the teachers union who fought to keep the school closed. She's a far left socialist who wants to trap people in failing government-run schools. She's repeated the same argument about government controlling the private schools. Is she saying that because she's some libertarian, anti-government type? No, she's a socialist who wants to keep her gravy train going. If you're on Randy Weingarten's side and not my side and Governor Bill Lee's side, you're probably on the wrong side. But look, not all school choice bills are created equal, and the ones that we've seen being pushed recently are some of the best, which include anti-regulation language in the bill, such as if you accept the funding, you're not a government entity. If you accept the funding, you can't have the state control your curriculum, your creed, your admissions processes, your discipline policies, and so on.
So there's language that you insert in the bill itself to make sure that it's clear what the state has the right to regulate and what it does not have the right to control.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's all about the language.
It's very light touch where you can't spend the money on a big screen TV with the ESA. So it's it's reasonable, fraud type of kind of rules.
Are some of the criticisms at Arizona fair? I mean, I've heard some criticisms that it didn't go far enough to limit the abilities for parents in how they spent their money.
So Arizona, they do have these anti-regulation specifications in the bill. So I think Arizona is one of the best school choice bills. Okay. And as far as, you'll see some lefty media, which is just an arm of the Democratic Party in so many places, they'll put out reports saying in places like Arizona, well, some parents did use the money for X, Y, or Z that wasn't education.
Right.
Well, they have annual audits to make sure that doesn't happen, and that's against the law. You can't spend it on big screen TVs.
In other words, those examples that we're hearing are against the very law, and they're going to be gone after.
Exactly.
As these things pop
You're not allowed to do that, and that it even comes up as evidence that they are keeping track of these things. And look, there's fraud that happens in the government school system. Are those same people going to bring that energy to the public sector? No, they're not going to say, oh, there was some fraud in this public school. We might as well abolish all the public schools because some of them have fraud. I mean, that's using an outlier to dictate overall policy, and we shouldn't bring that energy to school choice, especially if they aren't bringing the energy against the status quo.
Yeah, the perfect, the enemy of the good kind of thing. Yeah, sure. So I want to delve into with you.
I want to hit one more thing on the whole the government overreach argument, is that school choice can actually reduce the likelihood of overreach happening in at least three ways. One is the obvious change, is that you have fewer kids being indoctrinated in government schools to like big government, into thinking that big government's the solution to all their problems. If there's everyone going through that one-size-fits-all system, they're going to turn out to vote for more big government policy in the future. If you have an escape valve with school choice, you have more families going to schools that actually align with their values, and they might actually be even more supportive of the free market. Two, if politics is all about coalition building and organized interest fighting for what they want. Well, if you have more people using school choice, you have a bigger tent, a broader coalition to fight back against the authoritarians that want to regulate private and home education in the future. And then three, more people using school choice through ESAs that the governor is proposing, is you have a bigger tent, you have a broader coalition, and it's also more of a mainstream concept. If more people are using it, it's not some icky thing, the regulators would say that it is, that only a few people are doing it in the corner. Now it's a more mainstream concept. The rest of society should be less likely to call to regulate it. So all of these things move in our direction for more freedom. You got to take the W when you can, or else you're going to get stuck with the L.
And I want to delve more into what Arizona has done, what you like about Arizona's legislation, and what you hear about what the particulars on Tennessee's bill will be. Before we do that, is the very things that you just noted, is this why we're seeing such screaming and howling from the left, that you're cracking into that monopoly that it's not a full-fledged monopoly in as much as you have private education opportunities, you have homeschool education, but that's so limited to people who can afford it. This opens it up to such a much more broad section of the population. I contend that it will give those concerned parents the tools that they need to make the best educational decisions for their children. And secondarily, I think it encourages more active participation by the parents. In other words, there's a lot of parents that have checked out because they believe, well, why bother? We're zoned here. We can't afford to do anything else. I'm out. If they see other parents taking advantage of those opportunities, you're going to encourage parents, even if they don't leave the school system, to participate more within the system. And I think this is why activists in favor of the teachers unions and activists just in favor of big government and the monopoly that public education has, I think that's why they're howling so loudly. I think that's why they interrupted the governor last night.
Yeah, I mean, they started crying and booing when the governor said that the parents should make the decisions, not the government. So these people really think that the kids belong to the government. They want to control the minds of other people's children in their institutions we call public schools. And they're kicking and screaming every step of the way because they know Tennessee is going to get the ball across the finish line this year. Governor Lee's pushing it. House and Senate leadership are pushing empowering parents with every option in front of them when it comes to their education. And the latest polling from Beacon Center found that 85% of Republican voters support school choice. They also asked about, would you be more or less likely to vote for someone if they voted for school choice? And they found that 60% of Republican voters said that they'd be more likely to vote for their legislator if they voted for school choice. Only 4% of respondents said they'd be less likely to support a legislator who supported school choice.
I like to say often that I'm a simple man. I was publicly educated in the state of Georgia, so I don't know much. And so I try to keep things simple. And I've used the analogy quite often over the years that I've done this, that if I told you tomorrow that, Corey, the only place that you can go buy bread is one grocery store, and that's where you're going to buy your bread, and everyone around that grocery store, zoned for that grocery store, buys bread from that grocery store, do you think the quality of bread is going up or down?
They won't even have bread on the shelves. I mean, it'll be like socialist countries where you go to the grocery store and there's no food on the shelves. And if it is there, it's going to be expired and it's going to cause food poisoning.
Because what are you going to do? You're going to go to the other bread store? You don't have another bread store, right? They have
no incentive to do a better job. And the government doesn't do a good job at anything it runs. We shouldn't expect education to be any different. But what's interesting to me, you bring up the grocery stores, is that you have people on the left who vote against funding people directly to choose things that work best for their own families. They support it with everything else. You hear Democrats, they support food stamps, they support Pell Grants for higher education, for pre-K. I mean, you hear the main four-word talking point from the other side defending the status quo as they say, public funds, public schools. First of all, there's no such thing as public funds. They're taxpayer dollars that are extorted from us, from the government. But two, the same people saying these things, they support public funds for private health care. They support public funds for private groceries. They support public funds for higher education and pre-K. Why not for K through 12 education? It's because the Democratic Party is basically owned by the teachers union at this point. Randy Weingarten, who we mentioned earlier, 99.97% of her campaign contributions in 2022 went to the Democrats.
That's
They're
almost,
an arm of the Democratic
That's almost
Party.
100. That's almost that same.
If you do math at the public school, you probably figure out at some good ones that 99.97 rounds to 100.
Have to take a quick time out. 23 after the hour. Corey DeAngelis with us in studio talking about the possibility of school choice in the state of Tennessee. The governor proposed it last night. Let's see what's in the bill. We'll continue the discussion. Find out, what is Arizona doing right? Is there anything Arizona doing wrong? We'll find out from Corey in just a moment on Super Talk. I want to talk about Corey DeAngelis as well. He's in town. He's in the state, promoting the concepts of free choice in our schooling, our public education, and giving you the ability to look at the different options available to you in your neck of the woods. So tell me, we had Heidi on, as you, I know, are well aware, and thank you for getting the word out. You have a tremendous platform on social media, and you did a great service to us by getting the word out. And I think it's primarily just focused on, as it should be, what I would consider the hypocrisy of the left with regard to how they act versus how they tell you you're supposed to act.
Yeah, Matt, we gotta hire you full time just to do a show every day interviewing another school choice hypocrite. That was the best interview I've ever seen of someone pushing back against someone who exercised school choice for their own kids and then fights tooth and nail against it for other families having the same kind of opportunity, especially lower income families that can't afford to pay twice out of pocket and through the property tax.
Well, that's what's as frustrating as anything, is that if you cut through it, the ultimate reason that she had the ability to make the choices that she made, whether it's her parents making choices for her or she making choices for her own family, was her financial ability to do so. The distinguishing factor between herself and many of the constituents that she serves is that they don't have that financial ability, and she wants to prevent an opportunity to remove that barrier amongst those people who want to see better educational outcomes for their children. That's
it's pure elitism. You don't want your kids being around the kids that can't afford to go to your elite private schools. So I think that's part of the problem. But you had also pushed back and asked, what school you assigned to. She said Hillsborough Public School. Yeah. And you said, well, why not go to that school? And she kind of just went around in circles about it, tried to say, well, I went to this other school, and tried to say, well, it's their community, it's a cultural thing. You caught it, and I didn't catch it in real time. I was asking a lot of questions about why she made the decisions that she made and why she cannot see how others would like the opportunity to make some of those same decisions. And she said, well, for us, it was a cultural thing. And looking back on it, I wish I'd have noted it at the time, because I don't know what that means for Heidi Campbell. I don't want to act like I presume to know, but I can point to a couple of things. I mean, one would be economic ability to pay, which is going to exclude certain individuals from attending one of the most expensive private schools in the state of Tennessee, which is where she went and where she sends her kids. Secondarily, I mean, you just look at some basic demographics. Yep.
I mean, she's the one that called it a cultural issue, and basic demographics indicate that there's a lot more cultural diversity at Hillsborough than there is at this private educational facility. Yeah,
exactly. So, and the point of us to point all of these things out isn't to say, well, you shouldn't have your private reasons to be able to choose a private school. We're not telling her you should not be able to choose a private school. We're just saying that's fine. Have those opportunities for your kid, but you shouldn't be able to tell everybody else that can't afford to do so they can't have $7,000 to make it more likely to be able to choose an opportunity for their kids. So the thing is, the Democrat position relies on hypocrisy for people who send their kids to private school, because look, it's all about power. It's not about logic. They support funding students directly with higher ed and pre-K. They support funding people directly when it comes to every other, healthcare or groceries, but they don't support it for K through 12 for whatever reason. And it's all because of the status quo donates to their campaigns.
So she kept using the word scam, and I think it's a talking point that she was handed. I want to ask you about that, and then let's delve into Arizona and what you think is right about Arizona, if there's anything that you would improve regarding Arizona. Because Heidi, and the reason I bring up Heidi is she brought up Arizona as a reason why we should oppose Tennessee, which annoyed me. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Corey DeAngelis is our guest. It's Matt Murphy and the Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. It's a major push on the part of the governor and many in the halls of the General Assembly in the state of Tennessee this year. We're talking with Corey DeAngelis about it. It's important enough that Corey's in the state. And that means something because Corey is a national voice on the issue of school choice all across the United States. Toward that end, give me your analysis. You know, we had Heidi on. We mentioned that interview that did not go well. But she characterized Arizona as just an absolute failure, talking about, you know, just how awful how awful the outcomes were. I imagine that you have a slightly different perspective on the state of Arizona and what has happened as a result of school choice.
It's hilarious. Arizona is a success story for school choice, and the other side just freaking out because so many parents want to use it. They went from 10,000 students using their school choice program when it was limited in 2021 to in 2022 when they expanded it to every student being eligible. They went from 10,000 students to about 70,000 students using the initiative. Families want it. That's an argument for choice, not an argument against it. And, you know, she cited on your show that 70% of parents were already had their kids in private school. Well, that data was from when they first rolled it out. And that was after the school year already started. So those parents already had made their choice. So of course it's not going to be the public school parents. The latest data show that about half were already in the public schools. Some were already in the private school. And so it's a dumb argument either way. No one should have to pay twice. Families who were already in private school should benefit as well. And what about, like you responded, the other 30%? Do they not matter? Well, they should get a choice too.
And now we know it's half.
Yeah, the public schools have gotten better in response to competition in Arizona over time. They've had this ESA program for over a decade now, and the sky hasn't fallen. And bringing up Arizona is a good point too, because if Arizona can pass this, Republicans in Tennessee can too. Arizona had 1 seat GOP majorities in the House and the Senate, meaning every Republican voted for school choice in Arizona in 2022. This has become a GOP litmus test issue in places like Tennessee as well. You looked at the 2022 midterm elections in the primary in the House. 10 of the Republicans were actually endorsed or funded by the teachers union. 9 of them lost. It's become the political kiss of death to accept the support of the teachers unions in Tennessee and across the country because they become so politicized. They're about indoctrination. They're not about education. And in Arizona, you'll see some headlines that, the program's going to cost $900 million based on how many families are going to use it. But those same kids cost twice as much in the government-run schools. The scholarship's only $7,000 a kid. The government-run schools spend about twice that amount per student. Mm-hmm. So if those same kids were in the government-run schools, they'd cost $1.8 billion. School choice actually saves taxpayer money, so they call it a cost, but they don't look at any of the financial benefit.
I don't know where liberals are getting this $800 million figure from.
They're doing Common Core math. The teachers union group in Arizona tried to put it onto the ballot. They tried to get signatures to stop the program after it passed the legislature in Arizona, and they needed like 120,000 signatures. They said they had like 130,000. They only had like 80,000 signatures. So they were doing Common Core math, or they just don't understand basic arithmetic, and I don't want them teaching our kids if that's the case.
Well, and even if the scholarship program, and I've been told, we've not seen the legislation, we've not seen the particulars, but I've been told by people who are drafting it that none of this money is coming out of the current education budget. Exactly. Secondarily, even if you maxed out the 20,000 scholarships at $7,000 per, it's $140 million. I don't know where she's getting $800 million from. I think this is a way
everybody in the state's going to use it. They're telling on themselves. They really think that everybody's going to flee the public schools. No one's going to want to go there.
These public schools that are doing so great.
Yeah, if they're doing a good job, you should have nothing to worry about. And there are some good public schools in Tennessee, and they should welcome competition. They shouldn't fear it.
So for those who don't know, and I don't want to be guilty of treating you differently than Heidi, because Heidi kept referring to Arizona. I said, I don't care about Arizona. I care about Tennessee. You've not read the bill. The bill's yet to drop. However, what is the roadmap that we should expect based on your experience and based on the conversations that you've had with the legislators here in the state? what do you expect this to look at? How does it functionally work? For families listening to us, they've got no knowledge of what we're talking about. They got kids in a public school, and they don't feel like the public school is performing like it should. Talk to those parents and explain what this program would do.
Well, first of all, if you like your public school, you can keep it. And you can take the full $13,000 or so that Tennessee spends on public schools per student, which an amount that has increased by 180% in real terms after adjusting for inflation since 1970. So there's plenty of money in the system itself. You can still take all that money to the public school. That option's still on the table. If not, for whatever reason, you can take that funding to something called an education savings account, and you can use that funding like a health savings account, for example, but you can use it only for approved education expenditures. Most people use it for private school tuition and fees. You can also use that for homeschool curriculum. You can use it for a private tutor. For special needs students, you can use it for educational therapies for those students. So any approved education expenditure. It's the purest form of funding students, not systems. It allows parents to have the maximum flexibility to customize their children's education. So the money follows the child. That's basically it.
And it maxes out at $7,000. You're understanding?
$7,000 per student. And think about it this way too: the public schools, I said, spend about $13,000. Even if the funding did come from the public school budget, I don't think that's going to happen. They would still get to keep thousands of dollars for students they're no longer educating. So on a per student basis, the public schools would actually be more well off.
No, it makes sense. The math makes sense. So if for example, the three of us in this room, our parents take us out of the system and utilize
some of that
they're
money.
Still getting $6,000 per on a $13,000 per student basis. They're still getting $6,000 that is now not being utilized by the kid. That remains in the public education system, even if it came out of the budgets, which lawmakers say that it's not going to.
That's a good deal for the public schools. I would argue. Imagine if you were shopping at Walmart and you said, "I don't want to go to Walmart anymore. I'm going to go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, whatever, some other grocery store." And Walmart got to keep half your grocery funding each week. They'd be cheering for that.
Walmart's like, we're
the
good.
public schools should be thrilled they get to keep any of the money at all.
You're not going to drain our resources, but at the same time, we're going to keep some of the money. Yeah, that's all good. Tell me. You obviously are passionate about free market solutions. And obviously, this is not a pure free market system that we're talking about. Does it need to be? Should we not be striving for more open markets within the educational system? I think that's a solution that obviously the teachers union hate the idea because any competition is bad competition. I think we need to infuse more. I learned this when I was a young buck. John Stossel was a hero of mine, and he did a series of conversations about education in America, and he was always free market, free market, free market, giving examples overseas, particularly about how free markets work. Yeah,
it's not a pure free market solution, but it is the best solution that we have today. And as Thomas Sowell once famously said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. This is the best solution we have in front of us. It's not a perfect one. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a step in the right direction in empowering parents to choose for their own kids. Monopolies are bad in any industry, including in education. If you, like you said, had to go to your grocery store just because you lived by it and they had empty shelves and expired food, you should be able to go somewhere else. It's the same thing with education. If your education is not meeting your needs for whatever reason, you need to be able to vote with your feet, because look at what happens today when parents show up at school board meetings to complain about the radical ideology in some public schools. Is they get their mics cut off for reading books that somehow is okay to read to little kids, but not okay in a public forum for adults to talk about. They get their mics cut off. They were even labeled by the National School Board Association as they tried to get them labeled as domestic terrorists for protesting at school board meetings. That's not true accountability. The only real form of accountability is from the bottom up, being able to say, hey, if you don't listen to me, fine, but I'm going to go somewhere else and take my money with me.
Yeah, I always like to paraphrase William F. Buckley when we talk about our liberal friends, when he said, liberals are groups of people that claim to be tolerant of other viewpoints. They're shocked, dismayed, and disgusted when they find that there are some, right? I mean, they claim that they're going to be tolerant of your viewpoint until you bring it up, and then they want to shut it down.
Sure.
That's what they do. Questions from the super text line. Sally wants to know, if Tennessee's paying $13,000 per student, why shouldn't we give that all to the parents to follow the student?
Well, this is state level funding, and the state level portion happens to be around $7,000. These are passed at the state legislative level. So you can also pass legislation to allow the local funds to follow the student too. That would probably require the school boards to buy in as well, which would be another step in another fight.
I think we just did this, but Daniel writes in from Murfreesboro, and says, Matt, help me understand exactly how a parent will benefit from the school choice bill. I'd like to have more clarity on how the money would exchange hands. I think you just described that. Would it be in the form of parents paying the tuition, then they get a tax exemption on a certain amount of income? So, he wants to know some specifics about how, and I don't think we can answer the question specifically about the state of Tennessee, but how have other states done this in terms of the exchange of money?
You can do it a couple of ways. You could do it through a tax credit where you get a tax benefit for writing off private school tuition fees. But I believe in most states we have scholarship where the funding comes from the legislature, and then you can direct that funding to the school if you're choosing. So there's a couple of different ways it can happen. But those are the two.
Just paperwork would move the money. It would fund, like it would go directly to, for example, a private school. Yeah, it doesn't go from the state to the private school. It's directed by the parent from that education savings account, just like a health savings account. It's not from the provider to the end to the producer of the service. Right, sure.
The family gets to direct the funding.
And it's my understanding that the accreditation process that operates currently for homeschools and for private schools will remain in place. It doesn't change. Yeah. And so if there's a fear that you'll have all these pop-ups, right? These phony baloney pop-up private schools just there to take advantage of the system. And I would suggest that we watchdogs will be ready to pounce on those phony private systems.
We'll be ready, and parents will be ready. They know and care about their kids' educational needs far more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away. This is a big deal for parents to choose a school, and that's one of the most important decisions they'll make for their children's lives. They're not going to say, I'm going to send my kid to some school that looks sketchy. They're going to send them to a good school. And if not, guess what? When a public school does a failing job, we just throw more money at the problem. Families can't vote with their feet to escape those failure factories in some cases. In the private sector, if there's a bad actor, they will be held accountable by people closing them down by going somewhere else.
Well, and you've brought this up on a couple of occasions, but I think it merits repeating that this will help public schools too. If public schools come at this with the right attitude, right? We have more of a competitive environment now. We need to redouble our efforts to do the best for the kids that we have in our system. And when they do that, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, public schools up their game in response to competition. We've seen this everywhere. If those fear-mongering against school choice had the evidence, they would present it by now. But 26 of 29 studies find positive effects of school choice.
I promise you, when I go to the DMV, if I had the ability to go get my driver's license or my license plate across the street from another guy, the customer service that I have standing in front of me is going to improve.
That's right. Same thing with the post office. As FedEx and UPS have expanded, the post office in the government sector has gotten better too.
Let me get to William real quick. He's got a question on the phone lines. William out of Franklin, you're on with Corey DeAngelis and Matt Murphy. Good afternoon, William.
Good afternoon, guys. Yes, my question really is, you guys really think William F. Buckley would support this splitting of funds from the state to fund private schools? You realize, think this is a conservative concept?
I'm waiting for a question that's not rhetorical.
It's an honest-to-goodness question. It's fair. You really think
yes, I do believe that William F. Buckley would believe in freedom of choice and freedom of personal responsibility to make personal decisions for themselves, for their families, for their children. Yes.
It's also on the Republican Party platform. I mean, whose side do you want to be on? If it's a conservative issue or not? The conservatives in the state are supportive of it. You had the Democrats like Heidi Campbell coming in here and exercising school choice for her own families, and then fighting against it for others. And it's also a taxpayer savings because the government schools spend about $13,000 per kid. This is only about $7,000 per student. So it's a fiscally conservative issue as well. In Arizona, this happened as well. They cost twice as much in the government schools as amount, and free market competition's a conservative principle as well. In my home state of Texas, we actually put school choice on the ballot, and we had 88% of primary voters in the Republican Party.
Yeah, William, go ahead. We'll give you the final word. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it, and thanks for the information. I don't think Buckley would be supportive of the government funding a certain part of the market.
What are you? Forget Buckley for a minute. What are you supportive of, William?
What am I supportive of? Well, in Williamson County, we get about $3,500 per student. Not 7, not 13, 3.5. So
you get that from whom?
That's in I mean, it's well known. That's been in school board meetings. That's from that we've had down here for.
It's from the government.
You're getting that from whom?
I don't know who it exactly is.
Taxpayer dollars.
Are you talking about local? Are you talking about Williamson County local funding from the local community?
No, from the state.
From the state
that Williamson County gets. It's not been like shot down during those meetings. Like that's been, it's a BAP. I mean, so I can't remember exactly what the acronym is, but.
So I think the point is that
it's money per student.
The funding is already there. This isn't an additional expense to the taxpayers. And so, like, if the status quo was that we didn't have any government involvement in educating your kids, that would be an increase in government. But the status quo is that the government controls the education of everybody's kids, and you have to go to the school just based on where you live, where they're spending an exorbitant amount of funding per student. This is just a step in the right direction towards more free enterprise and less government by breaking up the monopoly, allowing the funding to follow the student, putting the parents in charge and not the government. And so this isn't a new, taxpayer expense, and so it is a conservative principle.
Before we go, a personal note: congratulations on your baby.
Thank you.
I know you publicly announced that on social media some time ago that you and your wife are having a baby, and that's a wonderful thing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. We're pumped.
Now, is your child going to go to private school?
I think we're going to homeschool, not sending my kid to other people to raise them.
Corey, in all seriousness, thank you for everything that you've done on this matter. I understand that it's controversial. I understand that you understand the nature of the arena. We appreciate you digging into the arena today and always in the state of Tennessee and around the United States of America. And we'll have more conversations in the future. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matt. Hope to come back soon.